for me, one of the, if not the best pundit in the game.
And it would be great if, say, in England, all the best managers were sort of English and so on, but it's not been like that for a long time. This is the same Emery who was criticised and laughed out of Arsenal by some of the Arsenal fans. I said, Leicester are done. They're not getting points, they're done. Fast forward to the end of the season, do you know who's done? QPR. We're done. I look out the corner of my eye and he's walking into the dressing room. So I'm stunned. I'm like, I'm in some sort of like, I'm having some out-of-body experience here. Yeah.
We had Chris Samba on the podcast. He said on the podcast very definitively that the QPR dressing room was the worst dressing room he's ever been in. Do you concur? Welcome to another episode of No Tippy Tappy Football. And we've got no Sam this week because he is off celebrating his 70th birthday. And by the way, he kept that quiet from us all here. So when he's back next week, I think we're going to need to make a bit of a fuss about it. So don't worry, it's not just me. I'm not just going to sit and ramble to myself for an hour, which I could definitely do. What I decided to do was open up my contact book and have a little whiz through and see who I thought would be the best possible guest that I could get on this week to chat to me about all things football. And so I stopped at one name, of course. For me, one of the, if not the best pundit in the game, as well as having a good, nearly 400, I think, career appearances. 400?
Bit more than 400.
Bit more?
Bit more, but that's all good. It's a strong start.
Okay. It's Nedum Onuoha. Welcome.
Thank you. It's good to be here. This is the future award-winning podcast, and it's obviously
thank you.
I can't fill Big Sam's boots, but it's good to be here.
I'm sorry you're not getting to see Sam. Have you ever met Sam? Worked with Sam?
I've worked against Sam many times. I've heard him say all sorts to wingers coming up against me, but yeah, I've never met him to socialise with him. But I think it's fair to say he's an iconic manager in terms of English football history for sure.
Well, we will send your best to him, and I'm sure he would send them back as well when he's back next week. But funny, let's get straight onto that before we talk about you and everything else, because you mentioned English managers. Obviously, in the last week, the New England manager has been named. It's Thomas Tuchel. What was your initial reaction?
Do you know, on that day, I felt like there were conversations saying, oh, Guardiola's considering that job and lots of other people like that. Then all of a sudden it was like, bang, it's Thomas Tuchel. And for me, it was unexpected, but then in the same breath, like, I get it. I could see why somebody would want to manage England, because it's, even though it doesn't necessarily have a rich history of success, has some of the best players that the nation's ever seen, and a belief that they can go and win things, as we've seen with Gareth Southgate in the past. So it's a really enticing job. And then I think the bigger discussion is, well, should it not have been an English manager? But I think historically in the last, 20-something years, we've seen a Sven, we've seen a Capello, and they did well overall. So I think in an ideal world, you want it to be English, but in reality, like for most people in the nation, is the most important thing not winning, because they've come so close so far that surely if you believe you can find the right person to do that, then that's key, isn't it?
Oh, 100%. I think if England go on to win the World Cup, not 1 ounce will be mentioned that he is German.
True. And do you know as well, to add to that, like, there are obviously lots of different opinions and so on, and everyone's entitled to theirs, but I remember some people that were saying Gareth Southgate, one of his issues was that he wanted it too much because he was English. So
can't win.
Exactly. So you can't win. Or they probably don't want it enough because they're not English. They want it too much because they are English. I think in reality, people just want to see them win. I think from once you do, then it'll speak for itself.
I think my only problem with it is I feel like it's the FA almost admitting that they have failed themselves in terms of their progression of English coaches.
Do you think so?
Yeah, I think it's them. They didn't even interview Eddie Howe, and did
they have to interview Eddie Howe?
I think as the currently most qualified English manager in the game, I think they should have interviewed him. Do you not?
Most qualified in what sense?
Well,
because he's doing the best.
Currently most successful, yeah.
Do you think Eddie Howe would have wanted it?
Would Eddie Howe want to leave Newcastle? I think that's a really good question.
Because I think we all know that, like, people that manage club sides and people who manage international sides, the way that they do it is very, very different. And I think there's an age where someone thinks that's the best thing to do and the like. And I don't know. I don't think the FA is perfect. I think many people would agree with that. But there'll be a reasoning for what they've done. And I think from a distance, it seems very easy for us to be very, very critical of some of the decisions that they made and who they've not spoken to and the like. But there's usually way more to it that makes it sound more sensible. But are the FA going to call a press conference and tell you about every detail of the process that they went through and said, well, this is how it is? Because there will be certain elements of confidentiality which needs to exist as well. But yeah, I think in an ideal world, you'd want Eddie Howe, you'd want Graham Potters and people like that to be in the mix. But then also, and I don't know if you'd agree with this, when it comes down to like English managers, some of the ones that we've seen, we tend to see them come from, say, lower divisions these days, and then get a chance in the Premier League, and they do well in the Premier League, and they get a chance to go to a big club. For example, a Graham Potter. But when he was praised at his previous job, when he went to Chelsea, people said, well, maybe this job's too big for him. So they immediately start putting them down. And the moment that he loses his job, the quest is to bring in someone who's not from England. I think the sort of international nature of what the Premier League is now, I don't think it necessarily helps English managers as such, but I think the Premier League at its best has some of the best managers that are available in European and world football. You just hope that there would be more English managers, but how do we get that? And is it really the FA that is stunting that, or is it a case of the clubs themselves who are stopping people from getting those jobs?
I think there's a lot. I feel like if Sam was here right now, he would be roaring that English managers don't get enough opportunities in the game as a whole.
Sure, yeah.
So then that would be
is that the
clubs.
FA or is that the clubs, yeah?
Yeah, but then maybe it's also the fans and the media, and maybe we're all a bit responsible because, like you said, Graham Potter gets the job and people go, ooh, that's big.
So within football, within sport, just within life, I think at times we talk out both sides of our mouth, and we can say that, yes, we want to see like an English manager be in there, but when you see like on a sports program, it lists all the managers linked with the England job, everyone's like, oh, it's not very exciting that. You know, you're seeing some of the English managers that are available and like, yeah, well, what if we do this? Oh, it's another, it's not a very glamorous appointment and so on and so forth. And so I think overall the English public doesn't have a belief in their English managers. And you're right, I think it's everybody involved. And at times I think we can be very guilty of just going along with a narrative and then forgetting what it could mean for the bigger picture. And it would be great if, say, in England, all the best managers were sort of English and so on, but it's not been like that for a long time. And as a consequence, this is where we find ourselves. So when you think about picking an England international manager, you could have someone like a Southgate again come in. But does that give the nation what they want, or will they be critical again? Because lots of people don't like Gareth Southgate, but objectively, the opportunities that England had whilst he was in charge were better than any opportunities we've seen since '66. So, it's a touchy one. It's a touchy one, but I totally understand. I understand what they're saying.
Yeah, in an ideal world, the manager would be English.
100%.
If they win, no one will care.
Yeah.
If they don't, then
that's the objective.
It's laid out there.
And I think as well, when it comes down to, I believe, World Cups and things like that, I don't think there's been a team that's won which hasn't had a manager that comes from their country.
Oh, really?
As it stands. So we'll revisit that in a few years' time, because maybe England can do it in the USA with a German manager.
Okay.
And I think for Tuchel as well, to add a little bit to this, I don't think the love that he has for, say, German football is probably not as big as the love that he has for England, from what I've heard. I think at times he will be rubbing people the wrong way in Germany. And I think from the German FA side of things, it seems like after Nagelsmann, it's going to be Klopp. And Tuchel maybe hasn't got a say in that. But I think Tuchel's got a little bit of edge to him. So I think his ideal World Cup final would be England against Germany, and he wins it for
Do you think?
100%.
Oh my God.
Think of it this way.
Yeah.
How many managers outside? In fact, there's a loose example, which is Roberto Martinez. Yeah. But how many managers have managed two national teams, big national teams, of which one of their national teams is their nation? Off the top of your head, you probably can't think of any. Maybe people in the YouTube comments and people online can tell us what it is, but I can't think of any. So to make a choice for your first international managerial job to be England, if it goes well, you'll do it for 5-10 years. Yeah. If it doesn't go well, you probably want to get back into club football. And that means that when you then, continue your club career, do you want to go back into international management again? And will Germany want you? Probably not. So I think he's made the decision that the team he wants to manage at international level more than any other isn't Germany. It's these boys for England.
I think it's really interesting, the names you just dropped. If we go back to what my point before about the FA, you've just dropped 3 massive German managerial names that would probably pick up pretty much most jobs in the whole world.
Correct, yeah.
And I just don't think you can do that with English managers.
No, you can't yet. I think that's the key thing. I think we can have a wider talk about British managers as such. But again, for the way that the Premier League in particular is, because as you go down through the Football League, it's different. But the audiences are also a little bit different. Like someone that watches Premier League doesn't always watch the Championship, and vice versa. Some fans are just they're obsessed with their club. They don't love football; they just love their club. But the aim would be to, as I say, have that. But the Premier League is such a huge league that when teams arrive in there and they want to stay up, they want to find the best manager that they can, not the best English manager.
Yeah.
The best manager that they can. So as a consequence, the the sort of search for a manager goes beyond your borders, because now maybe a Nagelsmann is really enticing, because you want to go to a team who are going to stay in the Premier League and they're going to go and potentially like go and participate in the Champions League and stuff like that. But maybe that will change. But I think as it stands, it's going to take a long time to get there.
Yeah. And I feel like I need to say for Sam as well, who would say this if he was here, you go wide and far looking for the right manager, but for some reason still it is more attractive for people to hire a foreign coach than it is for an English.
1,000%. It is sexier, and I think again, everyone's involved. You know, I think sometimes you can have a really clear thought process, but I think it was the start of last season, Gary O'Neill loses his job at Bournemouth, and Andoni Iraola comes in, and no one's batting an eyelid, even though nobody had seen Iraola manage the side that he was managing in La Liga. But it's fine. And now they're like, it's a great appointment. And seeing English managers lose their jobs feels more familiar in the Premier League than seeing them be hired. And that's a tough spot for them. And someone might say, well, Gary O'Neill's not good enough now because Wolves are struggling, blah, blah, blah. But I think he is. And I think there's a crop of like young managers who are in there who do have the potential. And some of those managers that we see, they might not necessarily be the biggest names from their playing days. Because a lot of the managers that we see, like, tell me who knows Jurgen Klopp's footballing record as a player.
No idea.
Who really knows Nagelsmann's, you know what I mean? Who's big on Tuchel's? They're not. But they had the opportunity. And my final-ish sort of point. In Germany, the 3 or 4 like biggest teams in terms of trying to find success now, you can have Leverkusen, you could have Bayern, you could have Dortmund. Leverkusen have Xabi Alonso, and he is foreign, but he's like 40 years old. Bayern have Vincent Kompany, who's 38 years old. And Dortmund have Nuri Sahin, who's played for them. He's 35, 36 years old.
You feel so old right now.
Yeah.
Jeez.
But you see how young they are, and they're being allowed to manage the teams who are going to be pushing for a title in that domestic league. If England could somehow have that and have it whereby, you know, these are people who are making their way through from the English football pyramid as such, then great. But then also the scale of the Premier League doesn't allow it sometimes.
Yeah, because then in contrast to that, we had Lampard and we had Gerrard.
Exactly, yeah.
And obviously when it didn't work out, I mean, Lampard, it feels like his managerial career is done, and obviously Gerrard had to go to Saudi Arabia.
I know, it's a shame. Well, did he have to? Or did he choose to? That's the thing.
Yeah,
and from once you go there, do you come back? Because if we look at, say, someone like Big Sam, who could be managing, you know, at some point in the future, he's 70 years old. Steven Gerrard is in his low 40s. So managerial career, it's decades worth. So I think for him, for Lampard and others, I think a point that I would make is that when you see a 17, 18-year-old player, you give them leeway because you know that in time they'll get better. But when we see managers, we don't.
Yeah.
But they're also getting experiences which they'd never had previously. That's why I say, for me, I watched Villa against Bayern a few weeks ago in the Champions League. And Vincent Kompany was on the sideline, and he's been managing like 3-4 years or whatever it is, and he's dictating his team and so on. And then I think the assistant for Bayern was like trying to talk to the 4th official, and I'll never forget this. Unai Emery just walks over to the 4th official, and he's like looking at it. He's like, nah, these guys, they talk all the time. Look at it. Like he commands that space.
Yeah.
Whereas when you're younger, you don't know how to do it yet. So I think in time, people can get better. This is the same Emery who was criticised and laughed out of Arsenal by some of the Arsenal fans. It's probably getting to a point where they're probably taking back now, which is a hot take. But is he perceived a failure in the Premier League anymore? Probably not, even though technically speaking, some people say that he did in the past.
That is a hot take.
Listen, I don't necessarily think it myself because I think Arteta's doing a good job.
Yeah.
But like outside of that, who's going to say that the job that Emery's doing, relatively speaking, isn't at least as good as the job that Arteta's doing at Arsenal right now? Whose stock is higher right now in the Premier League?
I mean, when you look at how Aston Villa are doing in the Champions League as well, I mean, they have settled right in.
And that's a failed, quote-unquote, Arsenal manager. Time, yeah.
I like that take. I think that'll get people talking.
Yeah, for sure, yeah.
Which
yeah,
I guess,
please don't come find me online.
He's not there. He's not online,
I don't exist.
He doesn't do online. It's a nice sort of segue into the Premier League, into Arsenal this season. They've had 3 red cards in 8 games. Now, we could delve into the individual red cards and the validity of the individual red cards, but 3 in 8 do you think they've got a disciplinary problem?
I think disciplinary problems come from yellow cards more than reds, to be honest, because those we don't say you don't need to go into the validity of it all, but I could make a case that all three are perfectly valid, to be honest.
Yeah.
And I think lots of other people could as well. They're not so contentious to the point whereby, if they could like have appeals and, win them and so on. And obviously with the two yellows, it's trickier, but the red the other day, like, you're not really going to be able to overturn that whether people think it's soft or not. That's just the way that the laws go. I don't think they have a problem like that. If a team has 4 or 5 yellow cards every week, and it's always the one where it's failure to control your players, which, by the way, is like, I think it's 2 people or more being near a referee. So it sounds really hectic, but you could just be standing there and get a yellow.
Yeah.
I don't think it's a problem like that. I think it's something which could very easily just like disappear. And for the players who've already received the reds, I'd feel very confident saying they're not going to receive another between now and the end of the season. And nobody wants to have another suspension. There are moments which I think some players look back at and think that he could do things differently. And I think the big problem is if they look back and say they do it again. But I don't think that's the case. I think they've seen the way that the team has suffered when they have had those yellows and turned into reds and alike. And they're just mistakes. I don't think for whatever people want to say about Arsenal's like style of play, I don't think it's so robust that there's always going to be a yellow card or a red card. I think there've been like individual mistakes that have come together to make it seem like they have a problem. But I don't think they do. I think they're still a pretty composed team. So I'm not buying that. I'm not buying that right now, no.
We have a mutual friend that is an Arsenal fan in our Darryl. And I was with him at the weekend, and he vehemently believes that none of them were red cards.
Yeah,
and
but fancy that. That's crazy. That's wild. Who would have thought?
Right.
Yeah.
So I very much enjoyed winding him up, and
yeah.
I was very much fishing with him, and he was biting.
Do you know the one of the big issues in terms of how we view football? Yeah, in my opinion, is that a lot of the lead commentators that do the games, they've had training. They're obviously good at their job, but they've also had training from speaking with the PGMOL and things like that. So the way that they perceive things, they understand what's going to happen when such and such an incident happens. But they ask the person next to them who might not have had the same training. So as a consequence, the way that, say, a co-coms, and it's not every co-coms, will like perceive a situation might be based on historically what they've seen, but not in terms of what today's refereeing looks like. Like for the Saliba red card, there's this like framework for DOGSO, which is denial of goal scoring opportunity, which means that because of the location of the incident, it will always be a red card or whatever. And that's why like it's overturned, because the referees themselves, they're going according to the handbook, and there's obviously an element of subjectivity in terms of certain decisions, like the Bernardo Silva incident with the goalkeeper the other day. But that's the way it's going to work. And I think there are enough people who are on TV and radio who can explain it to you, but it's not the people with the biggest voices or the people who are encouraged to talk about it. So Darryl will think that none of those are going to be red cards, but there's an explanation to be had why all 3 are red cards, and they would be if they happened again.
I that's a really interesting point. And you will know as well as I do in terms of, you mentioned that the PGMOL. So for what the general public probably don't know is there is a monthly meeting that broadcasters, reporters, commentators can attend with the PGMOL.
Yeah.
It's private though. You're not allowed to talk about what was said on the call, but they go through all of the contentious refereeing decisions from the previous month and talk you through the reasoning behind them. Which I enjoy them if I can get. The problem is they don't record them, so if you can't get on them when they're live, you can't get on them.
Sure.
I enjoy going to those, and pre-season as well. I don't know about you. I'm sure you were invited to them. I went to one with the Premier League and the PGMOL, one with the EFL, where they talk through you all of the new laws of the game, the decisions, what they're clamping down on. So. You can get the information.
You can. Obviously, there's some people whereby you can't make it onto a call or something like that. But I think for the quality of work that you do, I think you should be on the call, because the way that things are spoken about in that moment can dictate how people feel about it. Because sometimes, like, if a former referee says it, people still disagree with it, because it's within our nature to just disagree with referees in general. But when it's like a series of former players understanding why a decision's been given, you could say you don't like it, but you say that's what it is. And when it's like that, people will say, well, this is going to be X or this is going to be Y, as opposed to like this thing where there's just this big emotion. So that's wrong, that's wrong, that's wrong. Like, it's the laws of the game. Like, that's what it is. And I get shout out to Darryl, our friend. Like, I can explain why every single one of them is a red card, and he'll continue to disagree. You'll continue to disagree, but they're going to be red cards, and that's just the way that it goes.
Is there not a responsibility from, this is like moving on into punditry, obviously, you know how highly I think of you as a pundit, and and I know the work that you put in behind it, but is there not a responsibility for pundits, and you say the people with the biggest voices, is there not a responsibility for them to have done the homework, to understand the laws? Or is there not a responsibility of the broadcasters as well?
So, do you know, that's a fantastic question. Some people do the work. Some people do a bit of work. Some people do the work that like matters, because like one of my favorite pundits is Izzy Christensen, because I see how much she does the work. Like she's watching so many games throughout a week and trying to get an idea of how like teams play and why they play in that particular way. And I think for me, the best people on TV, radio, pundits, they're the ones who are more inquisitive as opposed to the ones who are definitive. Because if you're definitive, you're basing it on what you thought from back when, and today was just wrong. Like you just can't do that, or this should never be yellow. This shouldn't be this, should be that. Whereas the inquisitive ones understand the game changes on a year-to-year basis. And for most of us, like we retired multiple years ago, so it is a different game. And I would like to think that like broadcasters would say that these guys have to be kept up to date. But then realistically, you can't necessarily force someone to do something. It's not mandatory. It's not something which they sign in their contracts. And some of them have been doing it for so long that that's just the comfort, that's just the way that it is. Because these like PGMOL calls, it's not like they've been going on for 10 years, 15 years while these people have been, doing the work that they do. And I think also in regards to that, so I said the bigger voices, but what I kind of mean by that, I think the football community, it's obviously enormous. But times when they're together the most are when games are live on TV, or when you're watching a highlight show like Match of the Day or a preview on like Monday Night Football. That's it. So those platforms can really dictate narrative. And I've seen that myself in work that I'll do from Monday through to a game the following weekend. We're having discussions about what somebody said on Saturday night, having discussions about what someone said during the live game. And that's the power that they have. I think some people know they have it. Some people don't realize. But sometimes when something gets said, like I think it's disappointing. Like I've tried a very thin line here because I don't want to be like criticizing people, but there was a point last season where somebody, I think for Villa, went down holding their head, but the other team was attacking, and the ref stopped the game because he's holding his head. And we all know, we've all been in the stadium. The crowd gets really irate and frustrated, but it's because it's happening to your team. Yeah. Because if the roles were reversed and one of your players was down on the floor,
holding their head,
you'd be shouting, "Ref, stop the game." So that's the emotional side of things, yeah. But the person that was on said, "No, this is wrong. This is wrong. There's nothing wrong with him." And I thought that's such a dangerous thing to say. Yeah. Such a dangerous thing to say, because you don't know that. But then because now people will infer, well, this guy's just a cheat. But then to add to that, the law or the way it works is that the referee is entitled to stop the game if they think someone's had a head injury or a serious injury. So it doesn't need to just be someone holding their head. It could be someone holding their knee, holding their leg, holding whatever. That's part of the game. And in that moment, if you would have said that to the audience and say it's disappointing, but this is how it is, that maybe saves someone's life further down the road. But instead, it sort of added fuel to this whole like emotional fire about why are we stopping, it's fine. You don't know that. This is why this law's in play, and it will never change. That stance will never soften. So why critique it to a point where people don't believe it? But in fairness, again, the lead commentator knew that rule was never going to change. So he had a pause and allowed the person the opportunity to correct themselves. They doubled down. So then he finished off by saying, "Oh no, I think this is probably the right thing to do." And he had to chip in at that point because just, operationally, like that's the way the league's going to work, and that's the way it will always work, whether we like it or not.
Although my only thing is, if the referee wants to stop the game, the referee should stop the game. I never think it should be the responsibility of a footballer to kick the ball out.
Hey, listen, you don't know stress until you've got the ball at your feet and you see it peer down and all your crowd are telling you to keep playing. That is stress.
As opposition player lying down there.
You're like, oh gosh. Like, here are my peers, here are my fans.
Here's my morals.
Yeah, like, just what do I do here? That's pass it to someone else and be like, hey, listen, I didn't do too much. It's up to them now. It's up to them.
All this talking about the laws of the game as well, of course, makes me think back to City's win at Wolves on Sunday. I I was there, by the way. I was.
Oh, I heard you screaming. Everyone saw that online. Yeah.
Oh my God, it was one of those situations where we were doing a show, our Manchester City show, our Matchday Live show at the full time whistle. So we'd go straight onto the pitch at the full time whistle on the edge of the pitch and start doing the full time show.
Yeah.
So we've gone down to the side of the pitch, but there's quite a distance between the Wolves fans and the actual pitch. And so you don't want to block the Wolves fans. So we've gone right down to the hoardings at the side of the pitch and we've crouched down so you're not blocking the Wolves fan. We're right next to the bench. And I just had it's City. I just had a sense. I was thinking, we might score. We could score. I said, come on, we might score. There's like 5 of us in a row. And then obviously City score in the last minute. And I jumped up because it's the natural emotion of it. Like, couldn't help. I thought I'm going to get pelted here. So I came back down. Anyway, what stood out for me on that is the amount of people online and on radio phoning shows immediately after that went, he was offside. And it's like we're missing the amount of people that didn't know the basic laws of the game. You can't be offside from a corner.
Correct.
Like the basic laws of the game, like that people get so irate about.
Yeah, and it's the emotion for some, like against, say, like City or another big club or whatever, or the emotion because you support Wolves. Like that's what it just makes it feel worse. But I'll be honest, there are black spots in terms of the laws of the game that everyone has, whether you're a player, whether you're a fan, and so on. So because you don't know it, that's the way that you react to it. But do you know who knows it more than anything? The officials. And officials like will make mistakes or whatever, but like for them, that's not a mistake. I've personally not heard an official say that was the wrong decision, because that's the system, that's the process. That's why, for example, you have the video assistant referee, because that led to that being the moment where that's the correct decision.
Once, yeah.
Don't say for once, you. That was like ultimately the correct decision, because, you know, as I say, you can't be offside from a corner. And when you catch people out with stuff like that, in terms of like objective, like black spots in people's knowledge, people sometimes forget you can't be offside from a goal kick. People get hit with that one a lot. Sometimes you get hit with can't be offside from throw-in. And I don't know if it's still the case, but when I was playing in the Championship 2017-18, a law changed to where, say for an offside, you take it from where the person touched the ball. So in that first season, there were times when, say, we could be on the halfway line and someone was offside behind us, but then they'd run into their half and touch it. I'd be taking an offside 10 yards into the opposition's half. Brains were breaking in every stadium we were in. Like, what are you doing? Get him back. Even players like, what are you doing? I was like, what's up every season? Players get told what's changing. And I think you try your best to show fans what's changing as well.
Yeah.
But not everybody has the time. Not everybody cares. Not everybody wants to know.
Yeah.
But I think if you do try and keep up to date with it, you'll probably not be as frustrated as often. And you still have the emotional side, but you'll understand why it's being given. And like it or not, you just accept that's just what it is.
Yeah. On that big City goal, obviously it was John Stones that scored it again. City seemed to have Manchester City, people get annoyed when I say City, but it's just what I'm so naturally used to saying. Manchester City have a habit of having players that score big goals. I think like John Stones, Gundogan, Rodri. John Stones, though, has been a phenomenal Manchester City buy. 47 million pounds, I think he was, but it was 8 years ago.
Yeah.
What a player.
Yeah, it's been incredible. But interestingly, he went through a spell where he wasn't really doing as well. And there was talk, I think it was in 2021, where maybe he was going to be leaving. But then in comes Ruben Diaz and out comes the very best of John Stones. I think obviously there have been times when, you know, he's had fitness issues and alike, but then he ends up being a revelation in the most significant season in the club's history when they win the treble. You know, him stepping into midfield and not being a defender in midfield, but him just being an excellent midfielder, just out of nowhere. The composure and stuff that he has and that desire to win. And I think he's been there for so long. And this is a game in October against Wolves, but after he scores, look at what it means to him. You know, he's jumping in the crowd, obviously getting a yellow card for it and all that stuff. But he's been an incredible buy, and I think he's one of many that City have had. And I think some of those buys are incredible because they've stayed for so long. They've been a part of it for so long. And I think when you find clubs whereby the player turnover isn't massive every single year, and when you think, well, what do they need? You don't need 4, 5, 6, 7 players. You're very rarely doing a rebuild. It's just little bits here and there that sort of help the team and help the squad out. I think he's been amazing. Delighted that he's still at City, and he feels like someone that represents what like City is. And I think that will probably continue to be the case for a long time.
not just player longevity at City, obviously managerial longevity as well. Pep is the longest serving manager in the Premier League. Do you a lot of people obviously talking about his future. Do you expect that we will see him at City longer? Do you hope? When do you think we'll know? Do you know anything?
I know as much as everybody else, which is nothing. I don't expect him to stay. I'd love for him to stay though. And everyone listen to my word in here before you bite my head off. He is my favorite manager of all time. You know, I'm not going to say that he's the best because someone could make a case for someone else being the best. But you can't make a case for me that he's not my favorite. I think some of the teams that he's sort of coached over that time, you know, when he was at Barca, looking at the way that Bayern redesigned themselves as well, and for the way that he's changed things at City, it's been remarkable. And I think from the way that people who love the Premier League like hold it so dearly, like when he was first coming in, people said, well, you can't play tiki-taka football here. You know, you can't do any of that stuff. It's not going to work. And in the years that he's been there, he hasn't played that type of football. He's evolved himself and the players have evolved and the Premier League's evolved. And you can make a case that English football has evolved due to his presence. But he's also spent more than half his career at City now. And it's just not something I ever expected. He's had real like Mancunian moments, whether he's getting down with Noel Gallagher or whether he's like crying a few years ago after Gundogan scores to take the lead against Villa in the final game of the season. You know, this is something that I never thought I'd see from somebody from Catalonia. But if he does decide to leave to go and do something else, like listen, myself and probably hundreds of thousands of others would like carry him on our shoulders because he's been amazing. He's given us some of the best times of our lives, you could say, supporting Manchester City. So I personally don't think he stays.
You don't pop beyond the season?
I don't think so, no.
FIFA World Cup? Club World Cup?
Which will be tricky considering it finishes in July.
Yeah, in the middle of his contract ends at the end of June.
Yeah, especially players who could be out of contract as well. Like halfway through the tournament, all of a sudden you could just go and sign for someone else down the road in a different hotel. But I don't know. I think he wraps it up. But I've got no knowledge as to whether or not he'll do that. But I think you just be nice for him, you know. I think he's been remarkable, but he can't do the job forever. Even though, as I say,
I think he stays one more. You know, I know nothing either. I think he does one more. I think he wants to complete the Club World Cup, and I think he wants to. I feel like Rodri being out is significant.
I see that. But I think he also, like when he does leave, I think he'll want to leave the club in a good place for long term.
Yeah,
where he'll be helping sort of pick the successor, as say like.
So you think if the successor's available, he's more chance that he goes?
Yeah, I think he'll know who he thinks is best to work in the environment that is needed at City to be successful going forward. I think he knows it better than anybody else.
Yeah.
So I wouldn't necessarily think that he's going to go out in a way where it's just about him, the individual, getting what he wants. I think he's selfless enough, given the fact that his identity is all over the football club, to know what it needs to continue to be successful. Because for as much as he's a man from Catalonia, you know, he's a Barca boy through and through. You know, I think he's also half Mancunian now.
He is, isn't he?
He's half blue Mancunian. So I think he wants the best. So I think he'll try and find the best way to exit, whilst also allowing the club to continue to strive.
And as always, trusting Pep to get that right. So that's one end of the table. Down to the other end of the table, Southampton, Ipswich, obviously two newly promoted sides, both yet to have a win in the Premier League. Obviously, Leicester. We've got Jamie Vardy. They've got Jamie Vardy still, who's doing well. But what do you make of the fact that two of the three promoted clubs just seem to be struggling?
It's tough. It's a tough league. And when you come up, like, unless you're a team that went down that shouldn't have gone down, and then you just destroy the championship.
What do you mean by shouldn't have?
So we've seen teams, say for example, like a good few years ago now, when like Newcastle went down, like Newcastle in the Championship, what a complete waste of time that was. Like they were always going to go back up with the quality of players that they have, and then they could add a little bit to it. And before you know it, they're just like it's almost like the Championship takes some Premiership teams or Premier League teams on loan. That's what it feels like. And okay, you can go back now. Whereas for some of them, like Ipswich, we've not seen him in there for over a decade. The players that they have, if they were to all be like available to be sold now, how many of them would end up at Premier League places? I'm not sure. So this is all new to them. And I think when the Premier League is new to you, like it doesn't necessarily make it easier, because you do need to have a level of know-how amongst the group in total to be able to get positive outcomes, because that team is always going to be down near the bottom. as it stands. And if you do really well, you stay up. If you probably like perform normally, then it's the relegation dogfight. If you run out of confidence, then before you know it, you're down in the bottom three. And I think to add to it as well, start of every season, yeah, or just in pre-season, everybody's got hopes and dreams that they can do really well. And in a season, if 20 teams still did really well, 3 of them still go down. And likely it is, it'll be the 3 teams who have players who aren't necessarily at that Premiership level or Premier League level. 3 go down. And as it stands, those are the teams who are down there now. The ones who don't have the most experience of it. The ones who have, whether it's younger managers, younger players, or, you know, not necessarily, or don't necessarily have the ability to win back-to-back games in the Premier League. That could always change because earlier in the season. But until you get that first win, you don't know what's required to get it. And from when you do, maybe things can change. But in reality, like, this is the expected struggle. And I think for some, they should just be relieved that they're still 1-2 results away from being in a position where they feel more comfortable. But give it a few months, and before you know it, you might win and still be in the bottom 3. And I think that's when it gets really tough.
I hate the idea that the 3 promoted clubs just go back down again.
Why?
I'd like to believe there's, like, I don't know, I like hope. Like, what's the point in, like,
You
in the
know,
football pyramid if if every time people come up, they just go back down?
I think it depends. If they go down and it's like they're not even competitive, I think that's one thing. But as we're seeing this year, as it stands, like Palace haven't won either. You know, you're seeing an Everton side who aren't massively like pulling away. You're seeing some of the sides who are down there, and you'd be very, very surprised how much belief can change with a win. And then if you marry that with another, like a team that wins 2 games in a row down in the bottom 6 of the Premier League, will be mid-table thinking they can finish like top 6 or 7. But until you get it, that's the issue. And these teams are capable because they've had opportunities, but just haven't been able to do it yet.
Palace is a shock for me because, I mean, individually, they have players that could go anywhere in the Premier League. Well, not anywhere, but, you know, maybe perhaps, you know. But even still, I mean, Eze has been linked with Manchester City for many a transfer window. They are such a surprise for me this season.
Yeah.
Steve Parish has had a record of sacking managers early as well. Are you worried for either Oliver Glasner or Palace as a whole?
Yes and no. Yes and no. I think they still have the potential to not be part of the relegation conversation in a few months' time, without a doubt. But the longer they go without that first win, the sort of less belief you'll have going out into it. Because you want to be in a position where you just look at the side that you have and say, oh, the result doesn't matter, we'll just win the next one, we're confident, we're whatever. But in reality, at some point, it starts to affect you. Like when you finish the game, you're disappointed, right? Go into training, and it's very tough to just start on a Monday and feel like you can just disregard the result from before and be positive. Because at some point, like, you have to win. The crowd might start getting a bit tougher on you. You know, discussions around you might be getting a bit tougher. Though teams that play against you have more belief because they know that you've not won games. So you get to have a different experience. Whereas at the end of last season, you know, when they had Elise, Eze, they had Matetas, people in full flow, you're seeing the best version of them. And that's what a lot of us probably thought we were going to be seeing this year as well. But it's not the case. Premier League's super tough. It's super tough. And the moment you like show any weakness whatsoever, teams can pounce. I think the issue will come with them if they start losing games to teams around them down there now. But the other side of things, if they were performing okay, then the pressure around those games against the teams like Southampton's and the like wouldn't be that big. But now, all of a sudden, Crystal Palace can be involved in like emotional 6-pointers for the crowd. And I'll tell you one thing, if you were to lose one of those, especially at home, that is chaos.
And that's Southampton.
Chaos.
So, yes.
Yeah, it's chaos.
I mean, that for Leicester, that was a huge win. I mentioned Jamie Vardy earlier. Did you play against him?
Yeah, I did.
Did you have any battles against him?
Yeah, loads. Do you know, Jamie Vardy is such an interesting like case study in like different ways to do football, and I think he's very much an outlier. He is the exception because he got promoted to the Premier League for the first time in 2014. The reason I know that is because I was in the Premier League. I was in the Championship in 2014 as well. They came up automatically. We came up through the playoffs at QPR, and at that point, you know, Jamie Vardy is a football league player.
Yeah.
So for him to be in the Premier League 100 goals club now, him to be a full international, not many people saw it coming. And to tell a story that maybe some of the audience have heard before. So we came up in 2014. At December 2014 at Christmas, Leicester were bottom. And I was at QPR, we were at the second bottom or third bottom. And someone was having a discussion with me about who's going to go down, who's going to stay up. and Leicester was 6 points behind us. And I was like, "There." Like, I very, very rarely do I say something so like definitive. I said, "Leicester are done. Like, they're no good. They're done. Like, we've seen the way they're playing. They're not getting points. They're done." Yeah. Fast forward to the end of the season. Do you know who's done? QPR. We're done. Do you know who's not done? Leicester. They finished like mid-table-ish. Yeah. So the next year, when it's the whole like fairy tale of Leicester winning the Premier League, for me that was more of a nightmare. Given the fact they're a year earlier, I said,
You said,
yeah, I said that
they should be the Championship now.
Yeah, they should be cooked. So yeah, I'm in the Championship and I finished mid-table with QPR, and Jamie Vardy's lifting the Premier League title for Leicester. But I think for the way that he plays, the way Leicester were, they built the team very much feels like it's been part of his era. This is the Jamie Vardy era. This is the identity the team has. The way that he plays, he's obviously refined it throughout the years, but there'll be very few games which Jamie Vardy will play in where the defenders don't remember pretty much everything that he's done because he's so involved. He's like got a little bit, not necessarily ability-wise, but in terms of like influence, like a Rooney. If a game's not going well for, say, Rooney in his career, he's probably going to kick lumps out of you. And it's probably similar with Jamie Vardy. Like, they're scoring, but they always have an impact. There's always something that will come from the game which you'll remember them for. And Jamie Vardy, like, whether it's some of his runs, his finishes, the way he'll be like goading opponents, goading the crowd, like, I think that's what you need when you're looking for a spark, you know? Because, again, to mention someone else that we both know, like, Paul Dickoff was a disruptor.
Yeah.
Again, someone who also played for Leicester, yeah.
And been on this pod.
Yeah, exactly. Like, they make a big, big difference. And he's somebody you say for those years when Leicester won the league, I think they won the league with like the lowest average possession for a season. But when you've got him, you've got Kante's, you've got Mahrez, it's like you couldn't disrespect them because they will always punish you. Jamie Vardy, for the years he's been in the Premier League, which is I think this is his 9th season now. Amazing. Whatsoever.
I would watch a Jamie Vardy Hollywood life story film, 100%. Would definitely love the juice on that. You mentioned QPR there. We had Chris Samba on the podcast about a month ago now.
Yep.
He said on the podcast very definitively that the QPR dressing room was the worst dressing room he's ever been in. You were also in that dressing room.
Yeah, I was in it for a lot of years, yeah.
Do you concur?
I can't say Chris is wrong, because he's talking about his perspective, and I don't know all the other dressing rooms that he's been in, so I can't say that. But I think the dressing room that he came in during the January of a time when I think we won our first league game, like in week 16 of the Premier League, yeah. So there wasn't that much like camaraderie as such, because in reality, like one thing I discovered with football is when you're winning, everyone gets along, easiest job in the world. You don't notice people's differences until you're losing all the time. And now all of a sudden, like you're in a dressing room which had like Julius Cesar, Jose Bosingwa, you know, you could have a Chris Samba in there, but then you also had Jamie Mackey's, Clint Hills, like there's a real mix of people from all different like parts of the football world, different parts of the country, different parts of the world as well. And they perceive things differently. Like to one player, showing personality could be, you know, defending like a lion, like trying to block every shot, making loads of tackles. Whereas for the other, it's like, you know, I'm going to get the ball in midfield under pressure. I'm going to create something for my team. When people don't have the same vision, it's very hard to be successful. And I think Chris is saying it's probably the worst he's been in, but it wasn't full of bad people. It was just full of disappointment. I think there were one or two people who I would class as being on the, you know, rather the more toxic side of things, who, you know, have kind of exposed themselves in recent months and years and the like. But for me, it wasn't great, but I was there for the whole time. And it was just a tough environment because at the time, as I say, the identity of the players wasn't one which would mesh really well when things aren't going well. Because you can have some teams who are struggling down near the bottom, but they've all been built. Like, say, the teams from the Championship, Southampton's, you're talking about Ipswich, and Leicester to a certain extent this year, they've come up and most of the players are still there. So they went through that Championship side of things. But at that time at QPR, you're talking about very different players. Like, we just about stayed up. So now here's a midfielder like Esteban Granero, like such a top guy, and he could be playing Valley Fowling. But then, you know, I think Arkas Buzaki had just left at the time, and there were other players like this. And the people I feel sorry for the most are the ones who arrived thinking it was going to be a great season. And they arrived from different countries, different expectations, who are now in a dressing room in a really small, like, training ground in what is, relatively speaking, a very small stadium. And it was, the whole club at that time was a mess. It was a mess, I'll be honest. And it wasn't helped again by the fact that we weren't winning games. Because if you want to see the worst of people, It's when you're not winning games on a week-to-week basis, because then you're left in this position where like everything's being questioned. Some people say we train too early. Some people say we train too late. Some people are not training enough. Some people looks at someone, and there's always this ability to blame others, and as well to be very specific about it. When it comes down to English football, in most places, when things aren't going well, it starts to become xenophobic, and that can be very, very tough to be around, because you start to see the divisions and you start saying, pointing fingers. This guy doesn't care. Why is he doing this? This guy, why is this guy playing instead of me? And that environment is probably the worst he's been in, because it was the most chaotic. But again, I've got to stress, it's not full of bad people, but the genesis is the fact that we weren't winning games. And most people that were in that space were new anyway. Like at that point when he came in, I'd been at the club for a year, for example, and I was probably one of the longest serving players.
Wow.
So it's tough because people didn't know people, and it's a lot easier to get to know people when things are going well, as opposed to when things are going badly. And there's a lot of criticism about the individuals and the collective.
When you look at the individuals, I mean, there was some serious talent.
Yeah, absolutely. I wish it would have worked. And being in an environment where you're not winning games is tough, because then you come to training ground, it's a tough environment, and then you go to the stadium, it's a tough environment, because people start to lose belief, and when the crowd lose belief and the criticism rises, before you know it, you can hear everything in the crowd. You can see everything, because it's Loftus Road as well. Like, that's tight. Like, I remember clear as day pretty much everything that was being said, and it's tough. But unfortunately, that's just the way that football goes. And I think for me, I ended up staying for 6.5 years anyway. So I saw some highs, saw some lows. And I think by the time I was leaving, people understood who I was and who some of the players were at that time. But when things aren't going well and it's a new face, it tends to be quite tough to be able to fit in.
In terms of individual talent as well, I've heard you tell a story before about Zlatan. For anyone that's not heard it, would you share what it was like? Because obviously you and Zlatan were in the MLS at the same time.
Yes, we were. Yeah. So he was playing for LA Galaxy, and I was at Real Salt Lake, and we were both in the Western Conference. And I'd never played against him before, but just before I signed for RSL, they played against him, and I think RSL played against Galaxy, and they managed to beat them and so on. But anyway, time passes. And for me, who like loves football, Zlatan Ibrahimovic is one of the most significant names within football, whether we were talking about Serie A, talking about Liga, or like Swedish national team, like scored hundreds of goals. Some of the touches, some of his finishes, like amazing. But I was against a lot of the stuff which he used to like say about people and teams. Like, he has so much confidence in himself, which is fair enough, but it's the way he'd like put down others at his expense at times. And it disappointed me. And when we were in MLS together, like, there were so many one-liners that he was throwing out. Like, one which stuck with me is he said, "I'm like a Ferrari amongst Fiats." And like, there were people in my team who found it funny, but I was like, but he's disrespecting you there.
Yeah.
Like, he can say that he is who he is, but he could also talk about the good that does exist within the league as well. Because it is mixed. Some people came through from college, some people came from like Barcelona, but in reality, we're both sharing the same field and we're all part of the same product. So I didn't like that side of things. So then when we went to play against them, we went to LA, and we played in the first half, and he's there, we're playing Jocelyn stuff, and there's nothing going on. It's a bit of a flat game. And then start the second half, a long ball comes up, and I stand behind him so that he can't turn onto it. One of my centre-backs goes and retrieves the ball. I think it was Justin Glad at the time. And then he grabs me from like loosely around the neck and throws me to the floor. So I'm laying on the floor. I was looking at him like, what was that? And he starts saying, just get up, you, this, that, and the other. So my mind just left the chat. I was lost. I was so angry. So I got up. So I start proceeding to tell him exactly what I think about him in that moment. Yeah. And he's giving it back in fairness to him. And the referee's like, oh, come on, calm down. Some of my team's like, come on, calm down. But I'm frustrated now. And this is a guy that I don't know. So, right, it's on. So we're playing the game. And I think on the day, my team was better, but they ended up winning. And what made it worse was like through that second half, every time I'd make a mistake, he'd be like laughing. Every time he'd make a mistake, I'd be laughing. And this isn't me. I'm not really someone that like does that.
Yeah.
But I'm like laughing, giving it this. And he was being very critical of his teammates. Like, they needed him. And I just heard him just shouting at them saying, "You're no good, this, that, and the other." I'm thinking, this guy's like, this is so abnormal. But he scores the winner. And there's a picture, if anyone wants to Google it, of me like looking up like that, thinking, oh, for God's sake. And his face is right here laughing at me. But I didn't know at the time because I'm looking up to the sky. I didn't see it. I didn't see the picture till afterwards. So I'm disappointed. Like, I've had this battle with this person who is essentially a star of the game, which I acknowledge as a star, and walk into the dressing room disappointed because we should have gotten a result. And as I'm sitting there, I look out the corner of my eye and he's walking into the dressing room. And for the record, like, away or teams players don't come into someone else's dressing room until much after the game, if it's empty and if you happen to know someone. But this is maybe 5 minutes after the game.
He's like walking into your team.
Walked into our team's dressing room. So I'm stunned. I'm like, I'm in some sort of like, I'm having some out-of-body experience here. And his words when he first came in is like, "Have you calmed down yet?" Respectfully, I'm up again. So I'm like, I'm telling him again exactly what I think about all this, because I know this guy and he's trying to little boy me, and I wasn't there for that. And interestingly, like 2 or 3 of my teammates were backing it 100%, but most of them weren't, because in MLS at the time, like, it's all about the stars, and playing against him for some was like the peak of their careers and so on, and they didn't want to upset him and so on and so forth. But in that moment, they realized who I was. They kind of realized who he was, and weirdly, it was all getting recorded at the same time as well. Looking back, like, he's 6'4", like black belt in jiu-jitsu or whatever, probably would have flipping kicked my head off. But I'll tell you what, I've given it a right good go. And interestingly, from there as well, we were going to play them later in the season. And I was like flipping Rocky and training for it. I was getting so excited for this. It's like, he's going to know. He's going to know what time it is when he came to Salt Lake to play against us. And then he was as nice to me as any player's ever been nice to me. No. Mental warfare, gone. Tortured. I didn't know what to do anymore. It was really complimentary start to finish. And to make it worse, like, we both scored in the game as well.
You scored?
I scored and he scored. And I think looking back, like, he says sometimes that he needs to, if the game's too quiet, he tries to find a spark and fight with someone. And I think the fact that I pushed back against him meant they respected me a bit more, as opposed to, say, crumbled like some other people would have done. And it meant that, like, I can talk about this time when I had a battle with Ibrahimovic and whatever, a player who's done far more in his career than I ever could have done if I tried to do it for another 10 years. But I think it made a difference to my team at that time, because you got to remember, you got to stick up for yourself. And I think to link it to, like, English football today, all the teams in the Premier League, if they're going to go and play against a side in the lower division in the FA Cup or whatever, even if it's like a team in the 7th tier, they'll still say it's going to be a tough game. We're going to do the best that we can, because you have to offer them respect. Because the moment you take the respect away from it and you don't have it in the conversation, they'll give you the worst time you can imagine. So now go to America and somebody's going to talk you down and you're going to accept it. That culture needs to stop. Like, you're here with your team. And even if you like this player, if one of your players is at war with someone, we're all at war together. And I think that mentality shifted in my team and some of the other teams in the league. And it had edge before, but there's a bit more of an objective edge now. And I think that was a big moment because of it.
I love that story.
Sorry, it's a long story as well.
No, I love it. It's great. It's great. I love it. And I love the fact that he threw you with his niceness.
Super nice. Super nice. Like, he's checkmate.
I've learned a lesson from that, yeah.
Checkmate, yeah. If I'm at war with you and you're nice to me, like, I don't know what to do. Do not know what to do at all.
And random one, it's got me thinking, how come you're not playing football anymore?
Don't want to.
Just what happened?
So he doesn't want to.
Yeah,
I went to MLS in 2018, and at the time, the contract which I was given meant that I'd be playing there for 2.5 years. And when an older-ish player, somebody in their 30s, goes to MLS, like, you don't exist in English football anymore, because around those times, like, if you were in your 30s, even if you were a free agent, there was no massive demand for you unless you're like a big star anyway. So gone are the days of, like, oh, somebody's best in between like 28 and whatever, and being a free agent is like the best thing ever. Football changed. Like, we see it today that younger players are very much in demand, whether it's for ability or like the ability to sell them on afterwards. You know, that's the way it works. We can't say otherwise, because it's just an objective truth. So I was traveling to America with my wife and my 3 kids, thinking this is what I'm going to do. And then in 2020, which is the last season, I spent that whole year knowing I was going to retire at the end of it. And it meant that I enjoyed every moment that I could whilst I was playing. Downside was I was in America when it was the pandemic, when it was the election year, and it was like so much social unrest as well, that it ended up being tough for lots of different reasons. But still, the plan was to go home, go back to England when it was done. And I had a good season, and they wanted me to sign for longer, but I made the decision that I was going to be done. And
Why?
Just because, like, I love playing football, but I love being with my family more. I love being able to create my own schedule more. And as the years pass, like as a young player, you love everything to do with football, the training, the playing, like every aspect. So as I got older, I used to really love the days off because I used to wonder what can I do with my family now. When training sessions finish, like I'll do what I need to do, but like what can I do with my family now? Like what are my kids up? Where can we take them? What can we do, and so on. And starting the rest of my life became more exciting than continuing my football career, especially because if I would have tried to come back to England, the opportunities that you'd had wouldn't even be as good as the ones which you had before, regardless of however you played. Like I discovered that after 2017-18 at QPR, I was player of the season and then a free agent. And then the options I had wasn't anything of great note. So I thought, okay, fine. Well, it's time to, instead of just focusing on just playing a numbers game in England, let's go and have an experience elsewhere. And that experience is one whereby now every time myself, my wife, and my kids we go to America, it's like a holiday and heading home at the same time. So we see it in a different way. Like my kids were able to like be on ski slopes 10 minutes after leaving school and stuff like this. We were traveling to some of the best like national parks. We were in a place where it's like a 40-minute flight to Las Vegas, an hour to California. So we made the most of those 2.5 years that we were there. And then the biggest point, which I didn't realize in the time, and I think shout out to people like Joe Hart, who's recently retired as well, because he managed to feel the same feeling. One of the biggest rewards you can have in football is being able to retire on your own terms.
Yeah.
Not because of a physical ailment, not because you've tried to find work and nobody's interested. To say, this is when I want to retire, and to be able to do it, to be able to walk out of the game instead of limping out, instead of being pushed out through the doors and being forgotten about. It's like you're ready to do the next thing. And when you, like for Joe, he's fully acknowledged by that Celtic crowd. For myself, I was fully acknowledged by the crowd that I had in Salt Lake at the time, from the clubs which I played for, like City, Sunderland, like QPR. And I know that that section of my life is over, but I can feel proud about all the steps that I took within it, because I made enough impact to where people wanted to tell me thanks when I retired. And that's an incredible feeling. And I could have kept on playing, maybe fallen out of love with the game a little bit or whatever. But instead, I knew what I got from it was enough for me. And the rest of my life since that point has been exactly what I would hope for. Been able to travel the world, been able to see my kids grow, and been able to do things which keep me close to football, but I can always walk away from it, with the media type of things.
Yeah.
Met some great people, and you realize you're part of the bigger football community. When you're at a club, you just focus on your club. But now, like, I can go to any stadium, and there's probably people who've seen me do something somewhere before, or they're players on the pitch who played against me like 5-10 years ago, and you can talk.
Yeah.
When you're a player at one club, you don't really do that. So that's why I retired. And now, like, I'm saying, I'm not limping my way through life. I'm walking around head held high and enjoying myself.
Picking and choosing what you do.
Exactly. That's the objective. If you can get that, I think you've won.
That's a dream. Yes. Right. I'd like to do a little bit of quick fire now.
Okay.
And we are going to get our whiteboard out in a minute as well, everybody. If you're wondering where the whiteboard is for the podcast viewers, the whiteboard is not in shot at the minute. So what I'd like to do is quick fire. Which British teams are most likely to win the following competitions or go furthest when we're talking about Europe?
So we're talking furthest, and like, you're trying to nail me to like who is going to win it or who's most likely to.
So if we're talking like Premier League, FA Cup, League Cup, I want a winner.
With explanation
Champions
or just naming
League.
a team?
Give us a little bit.
Okay.
Right. So, and then Champions League, who's going to go the furthest? So we'll start. Who's going to win the Premier League at this point, in your opinion?
Based on where we're at right now,
Yep.
I think if Liverpool win against Arsenal at the Emirates on the weekend, I'd say Liverpool.
And Saliba's not playing.
Yeah, and it's at Arsenal as well. So I think Liverpool have won 10 out of 11 games. Obviously, there's a loss in there. But if they go there and win, that's a proper team, that.
If Liverpool go to Arsenal and win.
They're already top, but that's a proper team, yeah.
If they draw?
Then I'd pick out how the game goes. But who thinks they should have won? Because if it's just like an all-square draw, like in terms of the flow of the game, then like Arsenal be like, okay, we could test ourselves against the best, that's great. And Liverpool say, well, we've travelled down there to Arsenal, won a league, and that's great. But if one team is better than the other and the draw doesn't match the vibes, then that's a big statement.
What if Arsenal win?
Then Arsenal are back in it, yeah.
Are Chelsea a dark horse? Or a
league?
Yeah.
Not for the league for me, no. I think they're young enough to be able to beat any team at any moment, but also young enough to not necessarily go on a consistent run, which is required to win a Premier League title. Like, I couldn't see them getting 85 plus points, even though they've got the talent, I'd say, to beat all the teams in the league.
Okay. you're not mentioned City, Manchester City.
Oh, I thought you just
worried
wanted me
me.
to pick one.
No, I did want you just pick one, but the fact that you didn't say City's
No,
worried me.
because like
Yep.
the history makers, they speak
Yep.
for themselves. You know
Okay.
what I mean? Like if we were to talk about a different outcome to the one we've gotten used to over the last 4 years, then I'd say right now Liverpool.
Yep.
But City. So you know what I mean? They'll be there.
FA Cup. Who's going to win it? And then I've got a couple of follow-ups for you.
Who's going to win it?
Which is a really random question.
It is, yeah. I don't think many people would have said United at the start of last season.
No.
Especially going into that final game. So all avenues are open. And maybe this year, I'll go on left field a bit. I'll say Chelsea.
Okay. Yeah, I like that. I accept that.
If in the last 3-4 years, they've been to 3 finals.
Yeah.
Played Liverpool in every single one of them. And I don't think they've lost within 90 minutes with any of them. So there's an alternate universe where Chelsea have won 3 trophies and Liverpool haven't won any. So I think they're probably a better version of themselves now than they have been in those previous 3. So I'll say Chelsea. Yeah.
Could it be Spurs' best chance of a trophy?
At the time of this, I'd say yes. But if this came after they played City in the League Cup and if they beat City,
yeah,
then I'd lean heavily into the League Cup. Heavily, yeah. Because if City are out, then anything's possible.
Because obviously Ange Postecoglou made a big thing about, his second season.
Was he speaking facts, though?
Yeah, he was speaking facts.
That's what I mean.
Yeah.
So that's why he said it.
There you go.
Don't let facts hurt your feelings sometimes.
What about Arsenal in terms of Mikel Arteta? Arsenal last won the FA Cup 1920. For all the pressure they've put on in the Premier League, for all the way that team has developed, does he need to win something?
Yes. Not to the point whereby he loses his job if he doesn't. But I think he knows those players well enough to know that they are good enough to be able to lift the trophy at the end of the season. And I think he should expect that from the players. And I think the players will expect that of themselves. So whereas maybe 2-3 years ago, you say, oh, it's a young squad, they're still developing and so on. They are still getting better as such overall. But they have to be contending for trophies. They the fact that they were in, Arteta said, to go into that last game of the season with a chance to win a league title is a big moment for Arsenal. That's great. But why weren't they in the FA Cup final? Why weren't they in the League Cup final? I don't think they should accept a lower standard now because they know that they're good enough against absolutely anybody on that run. They've got the ability to win, whether it's grinding out a result away at City or being like a Bournemouth at home. They can do it. So I think he should feel the pressure of that. But I think he wants to feel the pressure of it because he knows his team's ready.
In terms of the League Cup, we already mentioned it. Spurs, I've got Manchester City at home in the League Cup. So if Spurs beat City, fancy them for the League Cup. If City beat
Spurs, not necessarily fancy them. I'd fancy them more.
Fancy them more.
Yeah.
Yeah, I feel like the League Cup's a strange one for Manchester City this year.
In what sense?
Well, Pep said in the last round that he's going to play kids in it this year, and that's not something he's ever done.
Yeah.
We played a 16-year-old, didn't he, in the last round? So
he did. But how much of that was because it was at home and it was against Watford?
And it was 2 days after Arsenal.
Exactly, yeah. That in particular was a big deal. It was a very, very big deal because I think Arsenal played a Champions League game on a Thursday as well.
Do you still expect City to go all out then?
All out at City I think can be quite subjective because there are certain players you play who some people think should start and others think that they shouldn't. I think through time there've been certain players who play all the time, like historically Rodri's and so on. But if Akanji's on the bench, is that rotation? If Diaz is on the bench, is that rotation? Is Walker on the bench? Is that rotation? You don't know. But I think based on how the fixtures fall, as in who they played before and who they're going to play after, I don't think it'd be a case of all 16-year-olds playing. I think there'll still be a team which he believes will be strong enough to win that game because I think the toughness of the game will dictate the team that he puts out. Because there's no chance on earth he'll put out a team which he doesn't believe can go and win there. And as he knows City's history there, as I say, I don't think it'll be an EBS team anyway.
Just for the fun of it, give me one name for the League Cup.
Oh, I can't say I can't say Spurs, can I? Because it's 2008. You know what I mean? People was that'll be ridiculous. But if Ange is a prophet, Sadly, I'll say Spurs. Yeah.
Okay.
Sadly.
Yeah.
Yeah. But obviously, this is fully placed.
Yeah, this is fully placed.
Yeah.
Okay, Champions League. Obviously, at the minute, so we're recording this on a Wednesday before Manchester City play this evening in the Champions League, and Liverpool will play today as well. Arsenal and Villa played last night. They both won. Aston Villa are currently top of the Champions League big table. Who's going the furthest in the Champions League, and is any of them winning it?
It's such a good question because early in the season, like the fields are a bit different. Like Arsenal have looked imperfect as it stands, but then we saw them towards the end of last season reach like a level which we hadn't seen them reach for probably years. But as it's the Champions League, I'm going to go and dive into saying City going the furthest, and I think Liverpool and Arsenal being very, very close in terms of how far they get. And for Villa, for them to be top now is remarkable. I think the result against Bayern is a huge result. But I also think the nature of that game wasn't one whereby they were like better than Bayern, but they won against Bayern. And I think if they were to play Bayern again, for example, in the knockouts and it's a home and away, I think that's when like the creme de la creme start rising.
Yeah.
And so I think Villa, I think they've got like the last game in their group was against like Celtic at home. That's incredible. And I think for them, I think they should enjoy it. And when they're in the knockouts, like they've got the potential to do well. But if the Champions League was an easy thing to do, like we would have seen, say, a team like Arsenal win it in the past, for example, which they haven't done, which still feels strange to me with the players that they've had and the teams that they've had in times gone by. So, yeah, I think Villa end up dropping off the earliest. But there's still a chance to win the whole, to like be top of the whole group. And I think whilst they've got that, push for it because you never know how that could help you long term.
Okay. Quick fire one. Who goes further in the Europa League, Spurs or United?
So many United fans around the world, aren't there? So I'll say Spurs. I'm joking. No. I think Spurs are more stable. United, like, they could beat anyone but could lose to anyone.
Yeah.
Whereas, and previously, like that would be described as Spursy. But I think, I think Spurs year 2 under Postecoglou are gonna be a tougher task. And as long as they don't have a ton of injuries like last year, I think they'll do all right that tournament. Conference
League, we've got. I forgot there's so many darn European leagues. Chelsea's chances.
Top. It's good, yeah.
Should win it, right?
You hate
the word should.
I can't
Could
say
win it.
I think they should be aspiring to win it, and I think Maresca will be thinking the same. And I think that's because, as it stands, like they're not putting out like really like weak teams or anything. And as they get, I also don't know which teams are also in that Conference League. Are Chelsea the best team by a mile in it? I don't know. But I think a chance to win a trophy, like go back 2 years, look at West Ham, see how they felt lifting that trophy. You know, their first trophy was not in their history, in however many years. I think Chelsea should have real aspirations to win it, and at any cost, in my opinion.
TNS are in it. TNS are in the Conference League. If for anyone that didn't know, the first time they've ever qualified for the proper stages of it, and it is absolutely
fair play.
Life-changing for a football club. That's not the right words, but for that football club. Okay, and then the last one, Championship. Obviously, you won promotion with QPR 2014. Sunderland currently top.
My old team, yeah.
Oh, yeah, of course.
This weekend, I was very privileged. City were top of the Premier League for a split second.
Yep.
Sunderland were top as well. So I've got teams heading in the right direction. Maybe next year it'll bring me more work.
You want Sunderland in the Premier League, yeah.
I mean, it would be good. You know what I mean? Those games in the North East as well. Hey, if you want someone that's been battered in one before, you know, you're looking at the right man. Sunderland, the hope is that they can hold on. I think the importance of a good start in the Championship is like massive if you want to go up automatically. Some of the teams that have a good ending tend to be the ones who are like going into the playoffs and so on. But there are some big teams there. But I'm going to say I think Sunderland come up this year.
I'd love that.
Yeah, I'd absolutely love it.
Would love a North East derby in the Premier League.
Yeah, it's a proper game of football, that.
Yeah. What do they call it? The Tyne and Weird derby?
Yeah. But for having lived up there, listen, man, if you want to feel pressure, that's that game. But that's what you live for. You know what I mean?
Really great game in the Premier League.
Yeah, you couldn't play for Newcastle or Sunderland and be able to walk around without people knowing exactly who you are. So the mood of the cities as well, definitely Sunderland is kind of linked heavily to how the club's doing. So if they're doing well in the Championship and they can come to the Premier League and have that sort of derby to look forward to again, honestly, the place will be bouncing.
again, I don't want the 3 teams that go down to go straight back up again, because I want to have some jeopardy in the football pyramid. Right, podcasters, you won't know any difference. If you're watching on YouTube, we're going to quickly bring the whiteboard in. So sorry, just going to quickly pause this episode so that I could very politely ask you to, if you're not already, subscribe and follow us if you watch on YouTube or wherever you get your podcasts. We're also on Instagram, and we're now on TikTok, because, you know, Sam is super trendy. We're on TikTok now as well. So please, it would be a massive favour. We'd really appreciate it, because the more subscribers, the more followers. You've heard this all before. The bigger guests, the better guests, the more we can keep doing. So go on, please. Sam's asking you, I'm asking you, give us a follow, subscribe to us. It's a very quick change around if you're watching on YouTube. And I've got the whiteboard out, and we are going to do a different ranking today. You know we love our rankings. We spent a lot of money on these magnets, so we need to make use of them. So today we thought, we're sort of 8 games into the Premier League season, so nearly a quarter of the way through the season now, nearly. We thought we'd have a little look at the summer transfer window and how well that has played out for all the Premier League teams so far. So we have ranking them A, B, C, D and E, which I presume is because we bought 5 letter magnets, and we are doing A would be excellent business, B would be great signings, C would be potential, D hit and miss, and E needs improvement in January. And Nedum has listed out what he thinks. So let's go right in at the top, because that's really interesting, because the only team that you've put in the excellent business window is Nottingham Forest.
Yeah, that's right, yeah. And upon looking at the board, I can hear everyone getting really angry at home already. Just give me a second. I think I went for the ones at Nottingham Forest because in, say, Anderson, Ward-Prowse's, I think Linkovic as well. Forest this year feel like a really good side, feel like a really tough side to play against. They're not conceding a ton of goals, and they carry a threat in transition. I think this is what they would have hoped for from their new signings, to be able to come in and feel like they can just go and compete against anyone. And we've seen them do that. You know, the win that's aged more than any other is beating Liverpool at Anfield. You know, Liverpool basically won every other game. So it'd be tough to say their signings haven't made a difference when, as I say, they're playing every single week. And right now, I think Forest are mustard, yeah.
Go on, Forest. Go on.
I think that makes sense.
Yeah, 100%. I just suddenly was coming into my head the story about the owner getting banned for spitting, but I feel like let's not go into that.
You've already gone into it, but sure, yeah.
Let's not go into that. Okay.
You just mentioned the thing that you don't want to talk about, but sure.
Yes, I know, because all I can picture it now is him in the tunnel spitting.
Yeah.
And, okay, right, moving on. Category B would be great signings. You've done City, Brighton, Bournemouth, and Fulham. So I've got a list of everything here. So for Fulham, Emil Smith-Rowe, Sanderberg, Andersen, and Reece Nelson on loan. Fulham have had a great start to the season.
Yeah, Fulham have had a really great start to the season. Like, you know, you can talk about some of their wins, but you can also talk about that game against Man City where they had more big chances, and they'll leave that stadium thinking that they should have won the game. Not many sides have that at City, but it's because of some of the signings that they have and how well they've integrated into the side. I think the Anderson one's a big one, replacing Tosin Adarabioyo. That's big because Anderson was doing so well for Palace last year and years gone by. And I think Smith-Rowe as well, somebody who's desperate to finally have a constant mark in the Premier League. And as you see the way that Fulham are playing, they're kind of similar to Forest in that most people now believe that they're sort of overachieving. But the signings have come in and they've made a difference. So that's why they're going to be in this tier for me. Same for Bournemouth and losing Solanke. That's such a big loss because he's been their talisman for the last couple of years. Evan Nelson looks like he has the potential to score, maybe not as many goals, but has as much impact. He's obviously missed a penalty, but he's a starter for them and he's doing well. And Bournemouth, you know, they just beat Arsenal. That's going to be a tough thing to do throughout this season. Mm-hmm. Then for Brighton, they're bringing in Rutter, Mintu, started a lot of games. And Brighton, again, another side under Hurtler, like such a young manager who's doing well with the signings, or the majority of signings that they brought in this summer. You know, it's very hard for them to almost match their expectations, it feels like, especially in terms of replacing De Zerbi. But for a new young players to come in, for them to do well, bang, no dramas. And then for City, there's obviously a bit of bias, and to be told they were one of the first teams spot on the board, so maybe my thought process was different at the start. But I think a year ago they lost their club captain. A year later they bring him back for free. And then you look at Savinho, who there's shown some flashes of reminding people of Mahrez 2.0, and that's the Riyad Mahrez who was very, very successful for City. And as it stands, they've obviously lost Rodri through injury, but a lot of the squad still feels the same, and it's kind of why so many people still favour them to be successful come the end of the season. So I think those signings coming in, bringing a boost in Rodri and bringing that element of flair. Now City can play a different way if they play Savinho and Doku, or if they're playing, say, Bernardo Silva and Jack Grealish. Guardiola has options, and it's because of those signings.
Love it. Okay, so that's great signings. So on to category C, potential. So you've popped in West Ham, United, Everton, Chelsea, Spurs and Arsenal. There is some big hitters in there.
Yeah.
And you've called them potential. Now, Gary Neville has said on whatever he was on, that Chelsea if they had a different goalkeeper and a striker, they'd be title contenders. Is that why they're kind of potential for you? And do you agree with that?
Well, I now understand that he doesn't like their striker, doesn't like the goalkeeper. Yeah, I get that. But I think up until this point, they hadn't conceded that many goals so far this season. I wouldn't necessarily put that down to just being the defence. And you could say that he's imperfect, perhaps. But, we had the same conversations a year ago about Arsenal and people saying that Raya probably wasn't good enough. And they didn't not win the league last season because he was in there. That wasn't any of the concern. Like, they were also being critical of Havertz. And I was like, Havertz is the best, 9-10 in the history of football. They might change their goalkeeper in time, but I don't think it's definitive to say just because you do this, it means that everything will fall into place. I think we might see the best of Nicholas Jackson going forward in the 9, and they can start to sort of score more goals as such. But a striker that scores 30 goals isn't the only reason a team wins the league. You look back to when City won the league with false 9s, and they didn't have anybody inside the top 5 or 10, I think, in terms of goal scorers for the season, but they still scored nearly 100 goals. So I'll put on the brakes and disagree on that side. But I think the category C for me is, I see what they've gone for. I see ridiculous.
Very nice
I see what they've gone for. Like with West Ham, I see the signings that they have with Somerville, Fulkrooks, people like that. I see what it could do for them. Same for United. I think for Everton, there's some Everton and Chelsea, the players who've come in, like at Chelsea, we're talking about Netos and Tozins, and they're not, and Sancho, in fairness, who's done well, and they're not regular starters, but they could help them go up a little bit. I think for Spurs, Solanke's come in and he's starting pretty much every game and he's scoring some goals, but doesn't feel definitive just yet as well. And for Arsenal, with Calafiori, with Marino in midfield and Sterling on loan, like, their impact will probably be graded upon whether they finish with a trophy. I think that's what it feels like for Chelsea, feels like for United, for Spurs and for Arsenal. And I think for Everton and West Ham, they feel similar to last year, but the strike and signings they have the potential in the second half of the season or middle part of the season to make them significantly better.
C, potential.
So
D, we've gone hit and miss. So in D, you've gone Southampton, Leicester, Wolves, Brentford, Villa and Ipswich. Do you want to, any of those stand out for you?
Yeah, so if you notice, it's 3 teams that have come up from the Championship there to start with. And then there's Wolves in there who, I think the point is, like, net spend, they're as high up as, say, many teams in the league, and they're not necessarily in a position whereby they can spend big money on forwards and alike. And I think for Villa as well, their team is top-notch. I think missing Douglas Luiz, bringing in Onana is like a great one. But in this section, for me, it feels like for likes based on what they were last season. And I think the teams that came up from the Championship, they've not spent like 100 million on players who've all been in the Premier League before for many, many years who can make a big difference. But they've brought in players who fit in with how they sort of played last year and add maybe a little bit, maybe. But I think the identity of all those clubs, in my opinion, is still kind of the same. So a summer of transfer business whereby there haven't been a series of signings which should raise the expectations as such, in my opinion. I think for the fans of those clubs, they can see whether they think the team's better or not. But in reality, like, I think those players can have an impact, but not, as I say, rise those teams up to another tier. And when you're looking at a team like Southampton, that's one thing. But then I think a team like Villa, I don't think, as it stands, their new signings are going to be the reasons why I say this year they win the Premier League. I don't think it'll be the reason why they win a cup, because I think they were kind of good enough already, if that makes sense. Yeah. Villa have replaced well. Wolves have potential to say they've replaced well, but I don't think their identity changes based on the signings they've had as it stands.
Yeah. Wolves, it's a difficult one for Wolves, isn't it? They need some new signings, but like you say, they're so heavily restricted on,
they are.
On money, and losing Kilman.
It's a tough job for Gary Neville being in there, and it gets tougher because of the way that squads and stuff were made in the past. But I think he's young enough and malleable enough to be able to make the best of what he has. And at times football can be about confidence because they certainly have the quality. And I think from once they can find the spark, I think they could be, they can separate themselves from, say, some of those teams which I've mentioned there.
Yeah. We moved down to E, which was a weird category. We called it needs improvement in January, but to be fair, we've put in Newcastle and Liverpool because they didn't really do
Yeah, Newcastle and Liverpool.
anything.
Yeah, Newcastle and
Butch.
Liverpool are definitely there because a lot of the talk about their transfer policy was people saying that they needed to sign people, but they didn't.
Yeah.
And whether that's due to like PSR rules or just the timing of certain things, or even say from a like Liverpool point of view, what I really loved was, the discussion about Liverpool before the season started was like, they need some more players to refresh this and refresh that. But in reality, that's people projecting because they're used to seeing the same faces. Whereas Arne Slot comes in and that's the best team he's ever managed. So he's not asking, you need to replace this guy because he's not felt the downside of having this guy. He's just seen their potential. So this tier here isn't like someone you could potentially put them higher and so on, but a lot of the key players for Liverpool are still the same players. So as a consequence, Liverpool and Newcastle, it feels familiar. And for some people, they don't like that because it feels like if you're not stepping forward, you're moving backwards.
Yeah.
So that's why they're in this tier. And it's not like an insult because circumstance sometimes puts you there. Whereas for Palace, you can see the impact that seeing Elise and Anderson has led to them sort of feeling like a different side.
Yeah.
And obviously there are other parts of that which can make a difference. But Kamada's not made the impact as it stands that they would have hoped for. And I think Elise, Anderson and so on, like to make it really, really, really nerdy out here, like they would be two of the players who you'd have in your fantasy team from Crystal Palace because they're the ones who tend to have outputs. So for them to be to not be there anymore and for the team to be at this point where they've still not won a game yet, I think you could definitely link those transfers. So whereas all the other ones have been about who you've brought in, I think for the Palace one to put them there, it's a case of who they've lost and the ability to not replace them. And it's a big reason, in my opinion, why they're not quite the team that we saw like 7-8 months ago.
Yeah, Elise, Anderson and Ayew proving massive losses for Palace. Thank you. Thanks for playing along with that.
Yeah, listen, I hope some people think it feels more sensible now. They might not do, but this is my sensible sort of ranking of transfers so far.
Thank you so much for coming in today and chatting to just me.
No problem. Pleasure.
Really
like
appreciate
always.
it. Thank you very much. Thank you for your time and best of luck with everything, picking and choosing what punditry work you want to do.
Thank you. And again, if you win the award, then I'll say I've been on an award-winning podcast again. Yeah.
Thank you.
Pleasure.
Thank you very much.
Pleasure.
Thank you. And thank you for watching another episode of No Tippy Tappy Football. We'll be back next week when our Sam is back and we're going to need to make a fuss about this 70th birthday that he kept quiet. But thank you for joining us.